Rick Ross just got exposed in the most humiliating way possible. Detroit left him standing on an empty stage. 50 Cent is laughing so hard, he almost fell out his chair, and the numbers Rick Ross just tried to post online might be the biggest lie in hip-hop history. Alright, listen up, because what just happened to Rick Ross in Detroit is not a bad night. It is not a slow night. It is not one of those things where you laugh about on Monday and forget about by Friday. What just happened to Rick Ross in Detroit is the kind of moment that gets stapled to a rapper's career forever. The kind of moment that ends up in the documentary they play 20 years from now when they try to explain how the mighty fell. The kind of moment that streaming services will use as a case study. The kind of moment that ANRS will whisper about in every executive meeting for the next 5 years. Rick Ross flew a private jet into Detroit. Rick Ross brought an entire orchestra with him. Rick Ross booked a real venue with real overhead, real lights, real staff, real payroll, real security, real catering, real sound engineers, real production trucks parked in the alley behind the theater. The call time was 8 o'clock. By 8:30, that room was so empty you could hear the air conditioning humming from the back wall. Nobody came. Not a trickle, not a slow build, not a late crowd, not a rain-delayed group that eventually filed in halfway through the opener. Nobody. And now Rick Ross is scrambling like a man who just realized the whole city he thought loved him decided to stay home, order takeout, and scroll past his tour poster like it was an ad for a product they already returned. So peep this for a second, because this story has layers, and every single layer is worse than the last one. Rick Ross has been trying to sell the world of fantasy for the past 2 months. Rick Ross has been posting the smiles, the champagne bottles, the caption slogans, the nothing but love for my city energy, the sold-out crowd shots from angles that never quite show you the whole room. Rick Ross has been walking around like a man on top of the world. But numbers do not lie, and Detroit does not fake it. When Rick Ross walked out on that Detroit stage and looked into that room, he did not see a sold-out crowd waiting to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Port of Miami. He saw rows. Empty rows. Rows and rows and rows of empty velvet seats staring back at him like a courtroom that already decided the verdict before the trial began. And every single one of those empty seats was a paying customer who saw the tour announcement, considered it for maybe 3 seconds, and decided their Saturday night was worth more than another Rick Ross performance. Here is where it turns, because this is the part where Rick Ross could have played it cool. This is the part where a smart artist keeps quiet, lets the internet cycle move on, quietly regroups, calls a marketing meeting, and figures out how to reposition the rest of the tour without becoming the meme of the week. But Rick Ross did not do that. Rick Ross grabbed his phone and started posting. Rick Ross started tossing out album numbers like he was throwing dice at a craps table in a casino nobody was watching, and every single one of those numbers has been dragged into the daylight and picked apart by the entire hip-hop internet inside of 48 hours. Rick Ross claimed 20,000 albums in week 2. Rick Ross claimed his streaming report shows 63.5 million streams across 2 weeks. Rick Ross said, and I want you to hear this in his own voice, that 63.5 million streams equates to approximately 42.5 thousand album equivalents, which does not include the physical products. Rick Ross is saying his second week held equal to his first week. Rick Ross is telling the entire industry there was no fall off. And Rick Ross is asking us to believe that with a straight face, in a week where his Detroit venue was so empty the ushers were leaning on the walls playing on their phones. All right, drop your verdict in the comments below, because we need to talk about what Rick Ross just did there. Because the industry does not work like that. Nobody in the modern era holds week 2 equal to week 1 on a legacy release without a viral moment, without a Grammy bump, without a scandal-driven streaming spike, without a placement in a Netflix show, without a TikTok trend attaching itself to the record, without anything at all fueling week 2 momentum. Nobody. Rick Ross had none of those things. Rick Ross had a quiet promotional cycle, a mid-tier press run, a couple of podcast appearances that barely cracked 100,000 views, and a tour that is now leaking pictures of empty rooms faster than his PR team can send out cease and desist letters. So when Rick Ross posts that he moved 20,000 units in week 2, the entire industry is doing the same silent math and coming up with the same silent answer. Rick Ross is not being honest with the numbers, and Rick Ross knows the industry knows, and the industry knows that Rick Ross knows they know, and everybody is just standing around waiting to see how long Rick Ross keeps up the performance. And then 50 Cent showed up. Because of course 50 Cent showed up. 50 Cent has been waiting for this exact moment for the better part of 2 decades, and 50 Cent is not the kind of man who lets a moment like this walk by without stopping to admire it, without stopping to photograph it, without stopping to frame it and hang it on the wall of his personal museum. 50 Cent posted a simple line, 4 words, and those 4 words hit like a car door slamming shut in the middle of a funeral. I'm sorry, bro. It's over. That is all 50 Cent had to say. That is all 50 Cent needed to say. Because when 50 Cent tells you it is over, 50 Cent is not saying it as an opinion. 50 Cent is saying it as a market analyst. 50 Cent has watched Rick Ross for 20 years. 50 Cent knows the signs. 50 Cent knows what a fake bounce looks like, what a real fall looks like, what a career pretending to still be alive looks like even after the pulse has gone flat. And 50 Cent just called it. Publicly. In the caption. With a smile in his voice so wide you could hear it through the pixels. Rick Ross fired back. Of course Rick Ross fired back. Rick Ross said his album Set in Stone pulled the streaming report, 63.5 million streams over 2 weeks, 42,500 album equivalents, no physical products included yet. Rick Ross said that equates to selling 22,000 week 1 and 20,000 week 2. Rick Ross said, quote, "No fall off, it's a long game we playing. No fall off. 20,000 in week 2 after 22,000 in week 1. Rick Ross wants the world to believe that. Rick Ross wants the world to pretend it never noticed that the venue in Detroit was so empty the cleaning crew was already sweeping between rows before the show even started. Rick Ross wants us to look at the caption instead of the photograph, at the streaming graph instead of the ticket receipts, at the press release instead of the pulled-back drone shot of half a theater. Here's the thing about lying with numbers. You can do it once. You can do it in a caption. You can do it in a comment section. You can do it in an Instagram story that disappears in 24 hours before anybody with a spreadsheet gets their hands on it. But you cannot do it when there is a live event with a real ticket scanner counting real bodies as they walk through a real door. And Detroit was that door. Detroit was the audit. Detroit was the reality check nobody could Photoshop, nobody could edit, nobody could spin, nobody could reframe with a better camera angle. Because when you flew a private jet, hired an orchestra, and rented out a legendary venue, and the security guards outnumbered the ticket holders 3-1, there is no version of the story where you are still winning. There is no comeback narrative that survives that photograph. There is no marketing team on Earth, no crisis management firm in Manhattan, no publicist in Beverly Hills who can unflop what Detroit just did to Rick Ross. Now let me be clear, because I do not want anybody thinking I am hating on Rick Ross for sport. Rick Ross made hits. Rick Ross helped build an entire era of Southern rap. Rick Ross carved out a lane so big that half the trap generation stepped through it on their way to becoming stars. Rick Ross was not a fluke. Rick Ross was a builder. Rick Ross had the deep voice, the cinematic ear, the mafia aesthetic, the boss life iconography that a decade of rappers would go on to imitate. Rick Ross was, at his peak, one of the 5 or 6 most important artistic voices of the late 2000s and early 2010s. That is not debatable. That is history. But every builder eventually has to answer the question of what happens when the building stops selling. What happens when the fanbase stops showing up? What happens when the numbers stop matching the narrative? Rick Ross is answering that question in real time, in front of the whole world, and the answer he is giving is not sitting well with anybody who is honest about the numbers. 50 Cent is not the only one laughing. The rest of the industry is watching, and they are asking a bigger, more dangerous question. Was Rick Ross ever really making those hits, or was Drake making them for him? Rick Ross had a stretch, and everybody knows the stretch, where every big single, every crossover moment, every radio smash had Drake's fingerprints somewhere near it. Drake on the hook, Drake on the writing, Drake on the cosign, Drake on the feature verse, Drake in the background of the studio, Drake shaping the melody, Drake polishing the chorus, Drake making the record feel like a Drake record with Rick Ross as the featured guest, even when it was billed the other way around. And once Rick Ross decided to burn that bridge, once Rick Ross decided to take shots at Drake in the middle of the Kendrick Lamar cycle, once Rick Ross decided to publicly pick a side in a war that had nothing to do with him, that whole factory shut down. And now people are looking at Rick Ross without the Drake infrastructure and quietly asking whether the man ever had the machine himself, or whether the machine was always somebody else's, and Rick Ross was just holding the microphone. Drop your verdict in the comments below, because this is the debate that is going to define the next chapter of Rick Ross's career. Was Rick Ross a self-made hitmaker, or was Rick Ross a beneficiary of the biggest ghost collaborator in modern rap? Because if the answer is the second one, then Detroit is not a fluke. Detroit is the beginning. Detroit is the first city that stopped pretending. And every other city on this Port of Miami anniversary tour is going to have to decide whether they show up out of respect for what Rick Ross used to be, or whether they follow Detroit's lead and vote with their feet. Because that is what Detroit did. Detroit did not boo him. Detroit did not protest him. Detroit did not organize against him. Detroit just did not show up. And silence, when it comes from a city that used to love you, is a louder verdict than any critic could ever write. So check this next twist, because while Rick Ross is out here trying to survive his own math, DDG walked into an entirely different kind of mess. DDG went on a stream and confirmed that his cameraman tryouts pay $5,000 a month. $5,000. DDG is a man who probably clears $50,000 to $100,000 in a good month between YouTube, streaming, music royalties, brand deals, and whatever else DDG has his fingers in. And DDG is telling his cameraman, the man who is going to live out of a suitcase, travel to Barbados, travel to Hawaii, travel to Dubai, travel to whatever country DDG is filming in that particular week, that his salary is $5,000 a month and free food. Free food. As if the cameraman is going to eat his way to financial security in a foreign country by ordering room service on the Artist tab. And DDG framed it like it was a gift. DDG framed it like the cameraman was getting free vacations. Free vacations. As if going to Barbados to hold a stabilizer for 12 hours while an artist shoots a music video is a beach getaway. As if standing behind a lens in 90-degree heat while a rapper does take after take after take is somebody's honeymoon. That is not a vacation. That is a job. That is the same job every music video professional in this industry has been quietly doing for 20 years, and every single one of them will tell you the same thing. When you travel for an artist, you are not on vacation. You are captured. You are on call 24 hours a day. You sleep when they sleep. You eat when they eat. You fly when they fly. You wake up at 3 in the morning when the artist wants to shoot a sunrise scene. You skip your girlfriend's birthday because the artist decided to extend a trip by 4 days. And the second the shoot wraps, you are on the next plane home. Alone. To an apartment you have not seen in a month. To a refrigerator full of expired food. To a life you paused so somebody else's career could keep moving. Peep this for a second, because here is what DDG does not seem to understand. When you underpay a cameraman $5,000 a month for that lifestyle, you are not saving money. You are guaranteeing turnover. You are guaranteeing that the best shooters in the game will never work with you. You are guaranteeing that the guy who is filming your legacy, the guy who is capturing the moments your grandkids will one day watch to know who their grandfather was, is going to be a guy who could not get hired anywhere else. And that is going to show up on your content, on your channel, on your Instagram, on your legacy tape, on every single frame that has your name in the credits. Pay them at least 10. 10 is the floor. 10 is the number where a professional cameraman can actually live a life outside of your schedule, can actually pay rent in Los Angeles, can actually save something for the years when the artist inevitably moves on to somebody else. Anything less than 10, and you are not hiring a professional, you are hiring an intern with a passport. Now here's where the DDG story pivots, because Dean showed up. Dean the streamer, the one Cripmac tried to shake down for $2,500 a few months back. Cripmac wanted Dean to pay $2,500 just to appear on a stream. That was Cripmac's opening ask. That was the number Cripmac put on his own back. And Dean said no. Dean walked. Dean kept his money. Dean went about his business and let the moment pass without a single public word about it. And now, 3 or 4 months later, guess who is knocking on Dean's door asking for a stream feature? That is right, Cripmac. Cripmac needs the exposure now because the internet cycle turned on him faster than anybody expected, and Dean, being the businessman he is, quoted him the exact same number back. $2,500. Pay the same fee you try to charge me. Same energy. Same paperwork. Same amount. And Cripmac is now discovering the oldest lesson in the internet economy. The moment you set your price, that price becomes the ceiling somebody else can charge you back. Every rate card is a mirror. Every fee you quote is a fee you might one day have to pay. All right, drop your verdict in the comments below, because we need to hear which one of these business decisions is the funniest. Is it Rick Ross pretending he sold 20,000 albums in an empty theater? Is it DDG telling his cameraman that a Barbados work trip is a free vacation? Or is it Crip Mac getting his own $2,500 price tag flipped back around on him like a boomerang? Because all three of these stories are happening at the same time, in the same news cycle, in the same weekend, and every single one of them is going to be a case study in a business textbook someday, taught in a class about how not to manage your own brand, your own labor force, or your own leverage. Now here comes the piece nobody wants to touch, but somebody has to say it. Famous Dex went on the internet, searched his own name, saw that he was not trending, misread whatever tracker he was looking at, and then posted, "Don't count me out yet." Famous Dex, my brother, if you have to Google yourself and then publicly announce that you still exist, the count-out has already happened. The count-out happened years ago. The count-out happened while everybody around you was too polite to say the word. Famous Dex needs help. Not headlines, not clout chases, not comeback singles, not features from artists who are only there because your name still has some novelty attached to it. Famous Dex needs real, structured, professional help, and every single person around him who is still profiting off the version of him that was funny in 2018 is complicit in whatever comes next. This is not gossip. This is a warning shot. Somebody in that camp needs to make a phone call before this becomes a very different kind of news story, before we are all sitting here in 6 months reading a tribute post instead of a comeback plan. The industry has watched this movie before, and the ending is always the same when nobody intervenes. So check this next headline, because the criminal justice side of this news cycle is heating up in ways I did not expect. FYBJ Maine's convicted killers, Sean Gothright and Rashad Murphy, were both rushed to the hospital after getting stabbed in jail. Both of them, on the same day, in the same facility. The details are still coming out, but anytime two co-defendants convicted of the same murder get stabbed on the same day, that is not a coincidence. That is a message. That is somebody sending a very clear signal from inside the system, and the entire Chicago rap community is watching to see whether either one of these men makes it out of that hospital in a condition to talk. Because if they do, the story of who ordered that hit inside those walls is going to be the story of the summer. And if they do not, then the story of who wanted them silenced is going to be a story that never fully gets told, buried under paperwork and prison transfers and case numbers nobody outside of Cook County will ever pull up on a computer screen. And speaking of stories that will not stay buried, Suge Knight is back on the witness list for the Tupac murder trial. Back in 2023, Suge Knight said he would not testify. Suge Knight said, quote, "Absolutely not. He was not getting on that stand. He was not helping anybody. He was not saying a word." Suge Knight was firm. Suge Knight was public. Suge Knight told anybody who would listen that the case was going to move without him. And yet, here we are, and Suge Knight's name is on the witness list. Something changed. Somebody made a deal. Somebody offered something. Somebody applied pressure. Somebody in the prosecutor's office found a lever, and Suge Knight, sitting in a cell in California, decided that the lever was worth reaching for. And whatever it was enough to get Suge Knight to at least entertain the possibility of walking into that Vegas courtroom and telling a jury what he knows about the night Tupac Shakur was murdered. That is a 30-year mystery, and Suge Knight is one of maybe 3 men on this planet who can actually crack it open. Drop your verdict in the comments below, because I want to know what you think Suge Knight is going to say. Is Suge Knight going to name names? Is Suge Knight going to protect the code? Or is Suge Knight going to walk into that courtroom and pull a full retraction the second the cameras are on? Because Suge Knight has a history of doing all 3, and nobody, not even his own lawyer, can predict which version of Suge Knight shows up on trial day. This is a man who has spent 30 years dancing around this question in interviews, in podcasts, in prison phone calls that ended up on YouTube. This is a man who has told 6 different versions of the same night to 6 different rooms. And now, finally, under oath, one of those versions is going to have to be the official one. And whichever version Suge Knight picks is going to rewrite a chapter of hip-hop history that everybody thought was already closed. Here's where it turns dark for another star. ASAP Rocky pulled his working offer from a logo designer after the designer publicly leaked ASAP Rocky's direct message. ASAP Rocky, who was politely inquiring about brand logo revisions, sent a message that read, and I am quoting the message directly, "Good morning, Alan. How much do you charge for brand logo revisions? Assuming you would be willing to do so. I'd be honored. Love your work. God bless." That is the message. That is the entire message. Read that message twice, because there is nothing in that message a professional designer should have taken issue with. That is a courtesy inquiry from one of the biggest artists on the planet. That is a job offer wrapped in a compliment. That is the kind of DM 99% of working creatives dream of waking up to on a random Tuesday morning. The designer's response? He screenshotted it. He posted it publicly. He captioned it, "I have no words," as if ASAP Rocky had insulted him, as if ASAP Rocky had sent something invasive, as if the polite tone and the biblical sign-off were somehow a violation of his artistic dignity. And then, when ASAP Rocky saw the leak and rescinded the offer, the designer captioned that response, quote, "This is just distasteful. Well, I guess we won't be working. Best of luck, buddy. Best of luck, buddy." As if ASAP Rocky was the one who violated the professional relationship. As if ASAP Rocky did not just watch a stranger publicly humiliate him for the crime of asking a polite business question in a private inbox. Now snap for real, because here is the twist. The designer might actually come out of this ahead. Because the second his name got attached to ASAP Rocky's, his phone started ringing. His DMs started filling up. People are curious. People are wondering if ASAP Rocky reached out to this man. Maybe there is something to his work. Maybe his portfolio is worth a second look. Maybe there is a level of skill in his body of work that justifies the attention of an artist that big. And that curiosity, unearned as it is, might turn into the biggest client year of his life, which is going to be the ultimate irony. The man who publicly humiliated a client is going to build his career off the publicity of that humiliation. The internet economy is broken in exactly this way. Bad behavior gets rewarded, professionalism gets ignored, and the only people who lose are the ones who taught us how to treat each other with basic respect. But here is the lesson buried inside all of that. Some things are meant to stay private. When a client reaches out, when a colleague reaches out, when a peer reaches out, that first message is a trust deposit. And you either honor that deposit and build a career, or you cash it out for one viral post and watch the entire industry quietly note that you are not safe to work with. ASAP Rocky will move on. ASAP Rocky has 30 other designers on speed dial. ASAP Rocky can pick up his phone right now and get any brand identity and fashion built for him inside of 48 hours. But this one designer just told the entire industry, through one screenshot, exactly what kind of professional he is. That is a career-defining moment, and not the good kind. Every major artist, every major label, every major fashion house that saw that screenshot just quietly added his name to a mental do-not-hire list, and no amount of new followers is going to unlock the doors that closed the moment he pressed post. Peep this final piece, because the ASAP Rocky story does not end there. Old text messages are leaking, and these are not just any texts. These are group chat texts with Rihanna in them, with Drake in them, with a whole circle of friends who used to sit around and joke together back in 2015, 2016, 2017. And that group chat is being dredged up right now, in 2026, as the internet tries to figure out why ASAP Rocky has been circling the idea of a Drake confrontation for so long. And the answer, once you read the texts, is not what you think. Because ASAP Rocky is not mad about the old jokes. ASAP Rocky is not mad about the old friendship. ASAP Rocky is not even mad about the fallout. ASAP Rocky is mad because Drake, in the years since Rihanna and ASAP Rocky went public, has been taking shots at both of them in a way that crossed a line. Drake has been treating Rihanna like a wound that never healed, like a story he refuses to close, like a chapter he keeps reopening in every album cycle. And ASAP Rocky, as the man who is now raising a family with her, has finally reached the point where he cannot let it slide. And the fact that Drake feels justified in taking those shots, as if ASAP Rocky is somehow the villain for dating Rihanna, that is the piece that does not make sense to anybody looking at this from the outside. ASAP Rocky did not steal Rihanna. ASAP Rocky did not sneak in. ASAP Rocky did not play dirty. ASAP Rocky met a woman who was single, they fell in love, They built a life. They had children. That is the whole story. That is the entire arc. And Drake, according to these leaking messages, still cannot quite let it go. Drop your verdict in the comments below, because this is the messiest, most human piece of this entire news cycle. Is Drake wrong for holding on to something that is no longer his to hold? Is ASAP Rocky right to finally push back? Is Rihanna somewhere reading all of this and quietly shaking her head at the fact that grown men, in their 30s and 40s, are still fighting over a chapter of her life that closed years ago? Because that is the real story underneath the story. Everybody in this triangle is a parent now. Everybody in this triangle has children. Everybody in this triangle should be past this. And yet, here we are, still watching it unfold in real time, still watching the wounds get poked, still watching grown adults process their 20s through diss records their kids will one day be old enough to hear. So let's stitch it together, because when you put all of this on one timeline, the picture is bigger than any one of these stories. Rick Ross is fighting for his legacy in an empty theater in Detroit, while 50 Cent laughs from the sidelines. DDG is offering $5,000 for a full-time cameraman and calling it a vacation package. Tupac is watching his own price tag get flipped back on him by a streamer he tried to shake down. Famous Dex is Googling himself in a hotel room somewhere and asking the internet not to give up on him. FYBJ Maine's convicted killers just got stabbed in jail on the same day. Suge Knight is back on the witness list for one of the most infamous unsolved murders in music history. ASAP Rocky is nursing a public professional embarrassment while old group chats between him, Drake, and Rihanna leak into the timeline. And every single one of these stories, every single one, points at the same underlying truth about the culture in this exact moment. Hip-hop is in an audit year. That is what this is. That is what all of this adds up to. The empty seats in Detroit, the leaked DMs, the underpaid cameraman, the flip price collabs, the reopened murder trials, the desperate self-googles, the jailhouse stabbings, the group chats that were supposed to stay private and did not. Every single one of these stories is the culture asking its own biggest stars a very quiet, very serious question. Are you actually who you said you were? Or was the last 20 years of your career a marketing campaign the internet was too polite to fact-check? And the ones who cannot answer that question honestly are the ones you are watching stumble in real time. Rick Ross cannot answer it. DDG is answering it wrong. Tupac already answered it and blew it. Famous Dex is answering it with a search bar. ASAP Rocky is answering it with a screenshot war. And Suge Knight is about to answer it in a Las Vegas courtroom under oath, in front of a jury, on the record, with his voice on the transcript that historians will one day pull to reconstruct what really happened on September 7th, 1996. All right, drop your verdict in the comments below, because I want to know which of these stars you think comes out of this audit year with their legacy still intact. Is Rick Ross going to bounce back from an empty Detroit theater? Is DDG going to learn to pay his crew before the whole crew walks? Is Tupac ever going to get another feature after this Dean situation? Is Famous Dex going to find the help he needs before the internet stops caring? Is ASAP Rocky going to finally sit down with Drake face-to-face and end this thing? Is Suge Knight going to break a 30-year silence in the Tupac case? Every single one of these questions is going to define the next 6 months in hip-hop, and every single one of these answers is going to embarrass somebody who thought their status was permanent. Snap for real, because permanent is a lie. Nobody is permanent. Nobody is untouchable. Nobody gets to skip the audit. Rick Ross thought he was permanent. Rick Ross flew a private jet to a city that decided he was optional. DDG thinks he is permanent. DDG is about to find out that the best cameramen in the industry are going to sign with somebody who actually respects their labor. Tupac thought he was permanent. Tupac just learned that market prices work both ways. Famous Dex thought he was permanent. Famous Dex is Googling himself. ASAP Rocky thought he was permanent. ASAP Rocky is watching his private inquiries become public receipts. Suge Knight thought he was permanent. Suge Knight is on a witness list nobody expected. And every star reading this news cycle right now is quietly asking themselves the same question. What happens when it is my turn on the audit table? What happens when the room goes empty on me? What happens when a screenshot of my worst instinct lands on somebody's timeline? What happens when a subpoena arrives with my name on it? What happens when the cosigner who built me decides they never really liked me in the first place? That is the actual news underneath the news. That is what Detroit is really telling us. Rick Ross is not the story. Rick Ross is the warning. Rick Ross is the neon sign flashing over the entire industry saying, get honest, get accountable, get real about the numbers, get real about the labor, get real about the friendships, get real about the receipts, or the next empty room is coming for you. Because Detroit did not decide overnight to stay home from Rick Ross. Detroit decided over a decade. Detroit watched the flip-flops, the fake feuds, the Drake pivot, the Kendrick miscalculation, the album bloat, the streaming inflation, the interview contradictions, the caption theatrics, the countless moments where Rick Ross said one thing on Monday and the opposite thing on Friday and expected everybody to keep up. Detroit added it all up. And on the night of the 20th anniversary tour, Detroit did what audiences almost never do out loud. Detroit voted. Detroit voted with silence. And silence, in the music industry, is the loudest verdict there is. Here is one more layer, because I want to make sure we do not walk away from this news cycle without naming the pattern. This is not just about Rick Ross. This is not just about DDG or Crip Mac or Famous Dex or ASAP Rocky or Suge Knight or the FYBJ main defendants. This is about a generation of artists who built their careers on a set of assumptions that no longer apply. The assumption that streaming numbers can be inflated forever without anybody noticing. The assumption that crew members will accept whatever pay you offer because the prestige is worth it. The assumption that feuds can be reset with a caption and a champagne toast. The assumption that private messages will stay private. The assumption that the code of the streets will always outweigh the pressure of a courtroom. Every single one of those assumptions is being tested right now, in the same week, by different stars in different situations, and every single one of those tests is coming back with the same result. The old rules are gone. The receipts are permanent. The audit is now. That is the tea for tonight, family. That is where we leave it. Rick Ross has to figure out what the next city is going to look like. Because if Chicago and Atlanta and Houston pull the same silence Detroit just pulled, this tour is going to become the most expensive career eulogy in modern rap history. 50 Cent is going to keep laughing for at least another 2 weeks, because 50 Cent has been storing this material for 20 years, and he is not about to run out. DDG has to figure out whether he wants a cameraman or an intern, whether he wants his legacy filmed by a professional or by whoever will accept $5,000 and free breakfast. Crip Mac has to figure out how to unset his own price ceiling, which is a math problem nobody in hip-hop has ever solved. Famous Dex has to figure out how to log off, has to figure out how to sit still, has to figure out how to accept the help that everybody around him keeps quietly offering, and he keeps quietly declining. FYBJ Main's family has to wait to see who survives the jailhouse, has to wait to see whether justice ends at the conviction or whether it keeps unraveling long after the sentence was handed down. Suge Knight has to figure out whether he is really going to open the vault, whether he is really going to give the Tupac case the ending it has been waiting